So to be honest with you, I thought really long and hard about how I wanted to start this episode. And I decided to start with this story because it just encapsulates so much of what I learnt about Kobe Bryant and what I'm going to share with you throughout this series on him. And so this first story, it took place at the 1996 NBA draft. And at least to begin with, it is best told in Kobe's words. He told us, "When the Charlotte Hornets drafted me," by the way, he was the 13th pick. "When the Charlotte Hornets drafted me, I got a phone call from their president of basketball operations. He tells me, 'We're trading you, right? And that's a good thing because we couldn't use you anyway.' And so he told us, I was thinking to myself, you mother effer, you don't say that to me." And so for the TV cameras at the draft, he might look calm and composed on the outside, but he told us on the inside, my shit just transformed. I was like, how much time we got here tonight before we're done? I've got to get to the gym. It just completely changed my mindset. Now, where I think this story gets even more interesting is behind the scenes, the Lakers GM, that was Jerry West, had orchestrated this deal to bring Kobe, the 17-year-old, to the LA Lakers. But, I mean, this part's really exciting for Kobe. However, in this particular moment, what captured his attention, if you like, was this outright dismissal from, as he saw it, the entire Hornets organization. And that sort of, that slight, if you like, would light a fire under Kobe that would burn radioactive for the next 20 years of his NBA career. And I think the best way to close out this opening story is with the words of Kobe's trainer. That was a guy called Tim Grover. He said, "There were 30 guys in the draft that night, and 29 of them would go on to have a celebration party. Just one guy was different. Kobe didn't celebrate. He went straight to work, straight to the gym."
I don't never stop, I don't never stop, I don't never stop, watch, I don't never stop, I don't never stop, I don't never stop, what,
All right, so that opening story, I just want to emphasize one of the first lessons that I took away, I mean, especially from this story, but actually from studying Kobe, is that he had a very good handle on how to use this chip on his shoulder. And I mean, I'll tell you, when I think about some of the best people that I've been around, some of the best people that I've studied, you know, this is actually a trait that many of them actually use. You know, when they come up against adversity or when they come up against problems, I mean, those things are coming. Using this chip on the shoulder, knowing how to use it correctly, can actually be a sort of, let me call it a sneaky superpower. And I mean, I'm just going to say right now, you know, I've got that chip on my shoulder, if I'm honest with you. And, you know, you need to figure out what yours is and actually learn to use it rather than it using you. And so we'll talk more about that as we go through these series. Now, before we get into anything else, there's just no denying that we lost Kobe Bryant too soon in that tragic helicopter accident on the 26th of January back in 2020. Along with his 13-year-old daughter and 7 other brave souls. You know, when I was researching Kobe, I saw this tribute from Morgan Freeman. He did this voiceover, and I wanted to share just a few of those words to start our journey into this great champion. "Dear Kobe, from the moment we first saw you on the court, tongue out, that swagger, in the Great Western Forum, we knew one thing for real. We fell in love with you. Young kids on the playground, I'll be Kobe, you be Shaq. We saw your hustle. We saw your heart, because it came with so much more. And when that fateful Sunday came, we weren't ready. We still aren't. You will always be that guy. 5 seconds on the clock, ball in your hands. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Love you always, Los Angeles." Now, you might have noticed the 8-second pause there. That was very much to signify Kobe's first ever jersey number at the Lakers, of course, number 8. And I want to tell you, having gone down the Kobe rabbit hole very deep, I really did find those words pretty meaningful, actually. Morgan Freeman, he took those words from Kobe's own Oscar-winning short. That's where you might have recognized those words from. And man, I've got to tell you, studying Kobe, it was fascinating to learn about his mindset and what was driving him, a little bit like the opening story. So before we get into any of the information, I thought I would share with you just a brief bit of the research that I did for this series. And so to begin with, I read the biography called Showboat, The Life of Kobe Bryant. And that biography is written by a guy called Roland Lazenby. He wrote it back in 2016. And it is a really impressive book. And it's pretty hefty, actually, 608 pages. But he just does an amazing job in taking us right to the very heart of Kobe Bryant's world. And, very much throughout these episodes, I'm going to share with you some of the most important and valuable aspects from this biography. Then to back up this research, I also wanted to read Kobe's own autobiography. That is called The Mamba Mentality. The Mamba Mentality. That was very much kind of Kobe Bryant. Everywhere I looked, it was talking about either the Black Mamba or the Mamba mentality. And so what is fascinating about actually reading in Kobe's words, the way he saw the game, the way he trained, and especially the way he studied the legends that came before him. He actually referred to them as his North Star. And so it was actually, it was fascinating to get inside of his mindset. That's what a lot of this study was about for me, understanding what made this guy tick. And so what I will just say about those two books, of course, Kobe had natural talent, but when I studied him, the main takeaway I think that I would have is he would study, learn, and practice almost like nobody who'd ever played the game of basketball before him. And so some of the elements that we will discuss are just going to give us such a great indication of the way this guy got the most out of his potential, which I just think is so important in any one of our lives. Now, I've mentioned mindset a few times. I really wanted to do my best to understand exactly how this guy, as I say, got the best out of himself. And so I turned to the trainer that I mentioned in the opening story. That was Tim Grover. Actually, I really like Tim Grover, and he's got a really fascinating backstory. He started working originally with Michael Jordan. And so when MJ retired, Michael Jordan and Kobe had developed quite a close relationship. And one day, Kobe was on the phone to MJ, told him about this knee injury that he'd picked up. And Jordan said, "You need to call my guy." And so that was Tim Grover. So Kobe started to work with him. Now, what I can tell you is that Grover's been in the trenches, obviously, with both of them and a lot of other great players. And so he's actually written 2 books on mindset. And I decided, I've read both books numerous times, and I've also got really detailed notes on them. And so from time to time, I'm going to drop in a few insights from him because he really has some very valuable perspectives. Now, next in the research, I watched probably 3 or 4 documentaries. The 2 that stood out to me the most, the first one was called Muse, and that was actually produced by Kobe himself back in 2015. But the one that got me really excited was one called The Redeem Team. So that was almost like a tribute to Kobe. It was produced by LeBron and D. Wade in 2022. And it basically outlines the US men's basketball team, of course, how they went to the Beijing Olympics in 2008 on a quest, by the way, I love that term, on a quest to try and win back the coveted gold medal. Now, we're not going to talk about that documentary in this episode, and so all I'll say is that when we get to it later in the series, for me at least, it really summed up the Kobe Bryant effect, the way he changed the mindset and the attitude of not just the players, but also the coaching staff on that squad. And so, man, I just love that he brought this winning mentality. And, you know, even in some of the best athletes that I've studied, man, this real kind of killer instinct, as we'll talk about, Kobe had it at a level that very few people can match. And so it's going to be fun to share some of those aspects as well. Then finally, to back up all the research, I went and watched, I'm not joking you, maybe 10, 20 hours of Kobe interviews throughout various stages of his career. This gave me an unbelievable understanding into this warrior mindset that Kobe would carry with him. And, you know, he just maximized the way he would go about learning his physical skills, his developing his mind, and also, I mean, this is key in Kobe's journey, developing his knowledge. And that kind of is what we're going to do throughout this series. And I think by the end of listening, even just to one episode, you're going to have a far deeper understanding of why this guy was just so special. Now, as you can imagine, I need to say this, all of that is too much to fit into one episode. And so initially my idea, my outline right now is to do maybe 3 episodes, maybe even 4 episodes on Kobe. And so, for this, obviously this being our part 1, I want to go back to the biography Showboat, and I want to share with you some of my favorite parts from the introduction of that book. And so this is how it reads. In the beginning, he came across as a fun-loving kid. He wasn't, of course. Kobe Bean Bryant had to work hard to show that nothing bothered him. From the earliest age, his father, former NBA player Joe Jellybean Bryant, had sought to establish in his son a supreme confidence. Above all, it remained his trademark. That impenetrable, unshakable self-belief was the one trait where Bryant clearly outranked his contemporaries, said psychologist George Mumford, who had worked extensively with both Jordan and Bryant. It puts him in his own category, Mumford would say. Throughout his career, if he was deficient in something, Bryant, and this is so key, Bryant would display the work ethic to build every element of his competitive portfolio with an almost manic insistence. With me, it's simple, Bryant told me. And so he's talking to the author, Roland Lazenby. With me, it's simple because there's a lot that I want to accomplish in my life. Most of all, I just want to be the man. Remember that. I just want to be the man. He told me, reaffirming his goal of making himself into the NBA's top player. I don't know how I'm going to get there, but I just have to find a way. And he would, despite how unlikely such a goal seemed at the time. Kobe had settled in on an answer he'd known all along. He was going to grind his way there, relentlessly grind away at the challenges of the game, night after night, game after game, until he found a dominance born of his ability to outwork everybody else. Now, I just want to pause for 1 second. We'll come back to the introduction in a second, but I actually think that is a really important lesson, that he's going to grind his way there. And I really think work ethic became such a synonymous part of my study into Kobe. It's such a theme that ran through his life. And I just think this idea of grinding your way there, working really hard, man, that is something that I took away from Kobe. And I think, as I say, it's a great lesson for any one of us. So continuing. He is easily one of the most driven competitors in the history of the game. One who over the seasons quietly gained a reputation amongst the insiders of the sport as an absolute master of study and intense preparation, with a singular focus on detail that astonished those around him. In the process, he became what would be described again and again as the most polarizing player in the NBA. I mean, again, that's such a true fact. Bryant could look back at the numbers he racked up in 20 seasons and declare that he'd earned a seat at the table with the game's greatest. What follows is Showboat, my effort to capture his fascinating story, in many ways a cautionary tale. Whew. I really do think that is a brilliantly written introduction because it really gives us a couple of important insights into the Kobe Bryant mindset and the way he went about his business. Now, before we talk more about any of the book, I also want to read this paragraph because the title of the biography is Showboat, and this explains why it was called that. Showboat was the nickname O'Neal gave to Bryant. Of course, that's Big Shaquille O'Neal, Big Shaq. The nickname O'Neal gave to Bryant when he was a rookie, eager to show off his dunking skills and ability to get to the rim. Bryant intensely disliked the nickname, yet the nickname also represents the prodigious love of the game that Bryant shared with his father and their delight in playing in a flashy, entertaining manner. And then Kobe said, "My father played basketball and it's kind of been in my blood since I was a kid." Those are great words, and I tell you what it made me think of, the note that I wrote down here to remind myself. I wanted to particularly mention the writer, Roland Lazenby, because he just does an amazing job at getting to the root of what was driving Kobe Bryant throughout his life. And I'm going to say this, that I've read a number of Lazenby's books, and I really think, in my humble opinion, he is one of the best, one of the premier basketball writers on the planet. And if you didn't know, he's also written books on Jerry West. He's written books on Michael Jordan. I've read the Jordan biography. It's fascinating. Another huge book, actually. He's written a biography on Magic Johnson. That was Kobe's first idol. And now, of course, Kobe Bryant. And so, these are some of the real greats of the game. And we will definitely get the chance to break down some of those excellent books on future episodes. Now, just touching upon the introduction, as I say, it really kind of gave us the opportunity to learn about a few important things that were driving Kobe. But actually, to really get down to business, I want to take us to page 91 because it told us something very important that we're going to use throughout this series. So it said this: over the next several years, he would show that he'd already grasped the powers of concentration and developed what he would later call the code. The code. So I took this concept of the code and I renamed it the Kobe Code. And throughout this research, I discovered 25 elements that just made him so special. And so I want to go through those. Some are a little bit longer than others. Some are quite short, but I wanted you to sort of get this list and understand, because this gives us such an amazing insight into not just what drove Kobe, but also aspects that we can introduce into our own lives and careers. So let's start off. We're going to talk about element number 1, which was self-belief. And there were 3 immediate things that stood out to me with this self-belief. And so first off, the biography told us this: since his startling emergence into the public spotlight as a teen in 1996, Bryant has stood before the public as a bright young man, polite and polished in so many ways, yet possessive, and this bit is key, yet possessive of an otherworldly confidence that is off-putting to nearly everyone who meets him, leaving some on occasions to doubt even his fundamental sanity. So this first point is almost like a first lesson for us, because if you want to get to the very top of any industry, whether you're an athlete or, an entrepreneur, it's almost like you really do need this huge level of self-belief, because things are going to knock that confidence that you have, knock that self-belief. And, what I've seen in so many champions, of course, Kobe's not the first champion that I've studied. They work relentlessly throughout their childhood, their teen years, on building their self-belief. And it is just quite literally something that Kobe was building, from the time he was 4 or 5 years old. And his father was a big part of this, what we're going to talk about in a moment. And actually, I wrote down this quote from Tom Brady. I mean, it's so simple, but so powerful. He said, "If you don't believe in yourself, why is anyone else going to believe in you?" I mean, it's so simple, but some of my favorite things, some of the things that stick with me for a long time are the most simple. Now, second, when it comes to this self-belief, I want to tell you about this interview that Kobe did with Big Shaq. So both players had retired and they sat down, they discussed many things, but there was this one moment that gives us an unbelievable indication of this self-belief that Kobe had. He had this superstar mindset, let's put it this way. But before we get to that, just in case you don't know Big Shaq, I want to describe him for you, because he was 325 pounds, 7'1". I mean, he was a monster. And also, he had just been traded from the Orlando Magic to the Lakers for a record $120 million. So, I mean, not only was this guy intimidating, he was basically the face of the NBA, but he was also the sort of epitome of confidence. And so, to think that this 17-year-old rookie, so, Kobe at that point was 6'6", and probably only 180 pounds soaking wet. And yet he had the confidence to go up to Shaq and say this. So in the interview, Shaq said to Kobe, "Do you remember what you told me on the first day that we met at the Forum?" So Kobe kind of smiles and nods, and Shaq continues, "You told me you were going to be one of the greatest players ever." And Kobe says with a grin, "I don't remember saying that, but it sounds like something I would say." I mean, at 17, you got the audacity to say this to the $120 million man. And so I think the lesson that I took away from this is, for any one of us, you've got to believe in yourself before anybody else does. So saying that, I want to talk about this observation that Tim Grover gave us in his book Winning about Jordan and Kobe. And so he said this: "Over the years, I've thought a lot about what made each one of them special. No question, each had immeasurable traits, but above all, they had this in common. They each possessed an unshakable confidence in themselves," and it's these last three words, "that never wavered." That never wavered. And I think I just cannot underscore how important, in basically almost every successful person I've been around or that I've studied, they all have this crazy level of self-belief. It's very rare to see someone who doesn't have it. And so I want to build on how Kobe got this, how he built it in his life and where it came from. So I want to take us back to the biography. This paragraph gives us a great clue, a great indication. It says, "The formation of that self-belief was due in part to the efforts of his father, Joe Jellybean Bryant, who carefully and continuously stoked his son's confidence, the father having watched his own promising career break apart in the swirling cross-currents of the 1970s NBA." What I'll tell you about Joe Jellybean, that was his nickname. He was this super talented player when he first entered the league. He was 6'9", taller than Kobe, and he was a point guard. And as I say, everything pointed to him having a really successful NBA career. But the thing that stood out to me in the biography is that things began to unravel. He bounced around from team to team. Eventually, they would all let him go, and he would watch his own career fall apart. And it very much spoke about because of lack of discipline, but most importantly, lack of self-belief. And when you don't believe in yourself, you end up kind of almost self-sabotaging. And so he made some really poor decisions. And actually, the biography recounts numerous stories. But I want to give us a concise taste without going into too much. I mean, the first 100 pages of the book, it really talks about the relationship. Well, it talks about the relationship between Kobe's father and his mother, but also their background. But I came across a couple of articles. I'm always looking in different places. I came across two articles, one in the New York Post and one in the New York Times, that I think really summarizes many of the stories from the biography. But basically, it was all about how Kobe's father would lose focus and make bad decisions that would cost his career. And so this one article, this one paragraph from the Post, it said this: "In 1976, when Bryant was playing for the Sixers, he was caught in a parked car with an old girlfriend in Fairmont Park, West Philly. When police asked for his license, he sped off, crashed into road signs, clipped 3 parked cars, and ploughed into a wall. When they finally caught up with him, they found 2 plastic bags of cocaine in the car. And then the Times said Kobe's father, after an 8-year career in the NBA, finally dropped out of favour with all the teams, namely the Philadelphia 76ers, the San Diego Clippers, and the Houston Rockets. I mean, they were the main teams. And then to fill in some of the gaps, the book actually used this powerful phrase that really stood out to me to describe Joe Bryant's career. It said, "Never the man," saying it was a phrase that would haunt Joe Bryant's career and an idea, and this is big, and an idea that would fuel his son to do just the opposite. You know, Kobe was the opposite. He was focused. He was disciplined. He had this self-belief. Exactly what we heard in the introduction. His philosophy was the opposite. "I just want to be the man," he would say time and time again. And the book went on to say, Kobe's father would later explain that he rued his own lack of confidence and partly blamed that for his failings. He seemed determined that his son would have none of this weakness. And I mean, that's exactly correct. Kobe wouldn't have any of this weakness. And that is why we're spending time on this self-belief, because I just think it is so vitally important in every champion that I've read about. And so I wanted to just share a couple of paragraphs. I wouldn't be doing the biography justice if I didn't share these with you. So first off, it said, since a young age, when he rode on bus trips with his father's second-tier Italian league team, we'll talk about Italy in a moment, and he promised the old man and another of his father's teammates that he was going to be far better than either one of them. Bryant's existence, this is a tremendous line, Bryant's existence has been an almost singular, inhuman pursuit of greatness. I mean, how can you not love a line like that? Singular, inhuman pursuit of greatness. And then it said, from his teenage years, Kobe Bryant has been shockingly bold in his prediction that he's going to make himself into one of the greatest basketball players ever. I mean, exactly what he said to Shaq. At every turn, his declarations of future greatness have been met with head shaking and raised eyebrows, because such dreams are ludicrous, impossible to fulfill. Kobe's crazy, the people around him concluded time and time again with a laugh. Yet now here he is, well on the path to wealth and fame that his great-grandmother once prophesied for someone in the clan, in the Bryant clan. But reading about all these sections, it made me actually think, who's the most confident athlete I've ever come across? And my mind immediately went to my father's favorite athlete. That was Muhammad Ali. Muhammad Ali burst onto the scene in the 1960s when he won an Olympic gold medal. But actually, it wasn't until 64 that he really started to shake the world, if you like, when he defeated Sonny Liston and went on to become the world heavyweight champion. But what I loved about Muhammad Ali was actually the trash talk, the poems, the way he would speak to the press, and he was almost like Apollo Creed. I mean, obviously Apollo Creed almost played a version of him in Rocky. The way he would have these rhymes and talk about how he's going to knock his opponent out in the second round or whatever. But actually the rhyme that I really wanted to share with you, the rhyme that came to my thinking was this, when he said these words. He said, "I've wrestled with alligators. I've tussled with a whale. I've handcuffed lightning and thrown thunder in jail. You know I'm bad. Just last week, I murdered a rock, injured a stone, hospitalized a brick. I'm so mean, I make medicine sick." I mean, how can you not love him? And the reason I share almost this comparison, I mean, Kobe was a lot quieter, especially with the press, but he had this underlying, deep-seated self-belief. And so I think the conclusion of all of this, learn everything possible, learn everything you can about how to develop your own level of self-belief, because it's going to be something that you're going to have to rely on. Now, that was quite a long first element. All of them won't be that long. But I want to now tell you about elements 2 and 3. So they are iron will and drive. And so the biography gives us a great insight into both in just a couple of paragraphs. And so first off, it tells us this. Millions of schoolboys in his generation have stoked dreams of matching the greatness of Michael Jordan. But only one amongst the millions, this is important, but only one amongst the millions has displayed the iron will and drive to pursue the game as Kobe Bryant has. Very important. And then it added this. Even as a teen, he was singled out by the representatives of Adidas and told that they planned to make him the next Michael Jordan. It was a role that lined up perfectly with his own designs. Now, a couple of points that I wanted to make here. The first one, just like self-belief, iron will and drive are almost primarily a state of mind. It doesn't matter in some ways what talent you have. You need to be able to develop this ironclad mindset. And that all sort of leans into the standards that you set yourself, almost that you take into every single situation. And I really actually like this quote that speaks to this from Cristiano Ronaldo. He said, "I'm not a perfectionist," maybe he is, "but I like to feel that things are done well. More importantly than that, I feel an endless need to learn, to improve, to evolve, not only to please the coach and the fans, but also to feel satisfied with myself." Again, that is why having high standards, having the right mental toolkit is so important if you're going to get to the top of the ladder. And then the second point that really feeds into this is the value of having a mentor. And what kind of really stands out to me, how many times have we already mentioned Michael Jordan in this episode? Because MJ and Kobe they're tied together in so many ways when you go into the research. The way they went about their business, but also in particular, the way Kobe Bryant studied Michael Jordan. And Jordan became not just his idol, but his mentor. What I think is almost more important to have this mentor, because Kobe went and studied every single aspect of Jordan. And this happened before they met in person. And that's why I wanted to point this out, because if you haven't got a mentor in your life right now, choose the person that you want to be most like. And it makes me think, in future episodes, we're going to study Tiger Woods. And Tiger, when he was just sort of 7 or 8 years old, had Jack Nicklaus. That was the guy that he looked up to. And so I just think these relationships can be so valuable in your life. You basically want to learn every single detail about the person you look up to most. You should be really the world's leading expert in that person, because I'm telling you, the power that comes with learning all the details that these mentors went through can help you so much in your own journey. Now, I want to jump about 100 pages forwards in the biography to really build on this mindset, what differentiates the best of the best, how they operate. And so let me see here. So in this section, it's talking about Kobe's remarkable athleticism and his polished skills, even as a teenager. And so it said this: "You put all of that together with this drive, and it adds up to being special. All of the great players like Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, they all had this incredible drive to be great." And then it said the key factor: there's a lot of players out there with a lot of talent, and they just don't have the mental toughness and that mental drive. My conclusion here, it doesn't matter what endeavor you're involved in, sports, business, entrepreneur, you need to develop this mental toughness and this mental drive to the maximum degree that's possible in your life. That is very much what I would describe as the philosophy behind the Mamba mentality. How do you get the best out of yourself? And so, what I love about the Kobe Bryant, going down the Kobe Bryant rabbit hole, everything points back to developing your own mind. Something I believe in so much. I mean, for the last few decades, that's been, pretty much what I've been obsessed by. So now I want to talk a little bit about elements 4, 5, and 6 in this Kobe code. So element 4 was discipline. Element 5 was perfectionism. And then actually, I'm not going to tell you element 6 right now. That's one of my favorites. I'm going to keep that a secret for a moment. And so to begin with, let's delve into element 4, which is discipline. So we're going to turn to page 52. And it just told us this one line that I wanted to share with you to begin with that really sets this up. Pam Cox, that's Kobe's mother. Pam Cox also had an uncommon personal discipline, another key trait she would instill into her son. And then it goes on to say, she was the one that made Joe, Kobe's father, she was the one that made Joe walk the straight and narrow. Joe's like a big kid. You couldn't do nothing but like him, it said. Some friends said it was no coincidence that once Pam and Joe got together, Joe's coaches found him to be more focused and under control. Now, obviously, because we're talking about discipline, I actually think a lot of people might underestimate discipline because ultimately it's a skill. It's a skill that you can work on and develop in your life. And the more discipline I think that you have, the more likely you are to both achieve success and get the best out of yourself. Of course, those two things are pretty synonymous. And so I've got to tell you, I'm very disciplined in my life, but after studying Kobe Bryant, after being around him, if you like, during this research, he has helped me to be more disciplined. Because I think to myself, what would Kobe be doing right now? And you learn these little secrets, these little things that he was using. And I mean, I'm telling you, if I only had a couple of weeks to sort of really change a person's performance, I would really talk to them about discipline. Because I just think it affects not only short-term, but especially long-term results. Because once a person really understands discipline, really puts it to a level in their life that maybe they've never experienced before, it really helps them to focus. It gives them a level of resiliency, this relentless approach that Kobe had. And it really helps you to sort of develop a very high standard in your life. And so really don't sleep on discipline. And so if we go back to the book, this is Kobe's father. He said, "My wife is the strong hand as far as discipline is concerned." And I mean, that's absolutely the truth. And it went on to say, if other people raise their children the way the Bryants raised their 3, there would be a lot of very productive people in the world. That was a line from one of Joe's teammates in Italy. So, I mean, ultimately, this discipline, it was something that really stood out to me about the way that Kobe Bryant would sort of go about his business. And the quote that I wrote down, I heard this quote probably 5 or 6 years ago, and I wanted to share it here. It's from the famous football coach Lou Holtz. He said, "Discipline is unequivocally the most vital skill for achieving success in life." I mean, almost couldn't agree more with such a simple line. And another interview that I saw with Kobe. So he was being interviewed by a guy called Patrick Bet-David. It's a great 1-hour interview if you want to go and check it out. I'll put it in the show notes. It's from about 6 years ago. And Bet-David asked Kobe, "How long did you stay disciplined for? How long did you stay disciplined for?" Kobe just gave a great answer. "Every day for 20 years. It was an everyday process," Kobe said. For me, it's just the simplicity and the total truth. It's almost like at times I felt like Kobe had drank this truth serum where he didn't, to me at least, this is my opinion, he didn't just say words to look good. The words that he said were the words that he was following up with his actions. And so it also made me think, I wrote down here, I saw another interview where Kobe said that when he was 13 years old, think of this, 13, he said, "I told myself that I wanted to become one of the greatest. That's a deal that I made. It was non-negotiable." Non-negotiable. He was able to keep his word to himself at 13 years old. And I think When you will see a change in your life, actually, when you start keeping the word that you've said to yourself. I'm going to wake up tomorrow at, let's just say, 6 a.m. and then you don't do it. Every time you break these promises to yourself, you're really sort of undermining yourself. And so when I read this, or when I heard Kobe say this, in an interview, it made me think of this great book that I've read numerous times. It's called The 4 Agreements. And actually, one of those agreements is be impeccable with your word. I mean, that means to other people in particular, but really probably the biggest strength is when you start being impeccable with your word to yourself. So the conclusion of all this self-discipline for me is that, in the mind of these champions that we study, they are very, very disciplined. And I just think that, one of the ways that you can change your life is to become more disciplined. Now, before we hop in, as I look at my notes here, before we hop into the next element, I just wanted to touch a little on family dynamics, because this is something that comes up in every champion story. It's really fascinating to learn about the champion's dynamics. And there was a paragraph that I think gave us an unbelievable understanding into what Kobe's upbringing was like. And so it said this, and this very much speaks to both parents, but in particular his mother. It said, as a close family friend noted, Kobe Bryant's young life reminded her of an episode of the old TV show The Twilight Zone, about a child so worshipped by his family that every day was like his birthday. And then it went on to finish, rather than spoil him, his parents' actions have had the opposite effect, serving to spur him onwards from a very young age in pursuit of his dream. And so I did want to build just a little bit more on the family dynamics, because I saw this 60-minute piece from back in 2001 where Kobe was being interviewed by Charlie Rose. And Kobe gave us a valuable insight into his sort of beginnings with basketball, and it gives us kind of an idea of how he was supported by his parents. And so Kobe said, my mother used to tell me stories that my father used to play basketball on TV. And so he said, I'd put on my jersey, I'd have my shorts on, and when he would play, I would play too. I had a little hoop in the living room. I'd play, then I'd take a time out, sit down, have some water, wipe the sweat off, then start playing again. Kobe said, I'm 3 years old, and I would do this for the entire game. And then when the game was over, and this is almost quite an important detail, when the game was over, I'd take a shower. I felt like I was part of the game, he said. I mean, the thing that stood out to me, just being obsessed by something. I mean, it reminded me again of the childhood of Tiger Woods. Both Kobe and Tiger were totally immersed in their chosen sport from a very young age. And so the only caveat I would say, these are all lessons to learn. And so being obsessed and being immersed in something, it doesn't just have to start when you're young. Maybe you're 25 right now, maybe you're 50. Get immersed in what it is that you want to go out there and do, because the more you get immersed, the more you start rewiring your brain. I'm a great believer in this, man. And I suppose I say that because I get totally obsessed, as you'll see as we go through these episodes. This is not just a study for me. This is about changing our lives. And so that brings us on to our next element number 5, which is perfectionism. This is another theme that was ran through Kobe's life, and this was something that he also got from his mother. And so it tells us this. I love this paragraph. Mother and son shared pleasant personalities for the most part, right down to their demeanours that could turn surprisingly cold in a flash. The primary driving element, however, was perfectionism. Tex Winter, the veteran coach who worked so closely with both Jordan and Bryant, would often say, it was chief amongst the many fundamental traits the two superstars shared, their intense perfectionism. The perfectionism was with the way that Kobe trained, the way he studied game tape, and especially the way that he would obsess over every detail of Michael Jordan's game. I mean, frame by frame, Kobe would study the way Jordan went about things and would go out there, not just copy, but look to perfect those aspects. And so I wanted to share this line. This is quite nuanced, but it really brings an important element of what it takes to have a level of perfectionism in your life. And so the book told us this paragraph. A reporter asked Bryant about his life outside of basketball in his early years at the Lakers. And I just love this reply. He said, "Basketball, there is nothing else." And then it said, to others not driven to find perfection in such a pursuit, this answer would seem ludicrous, and such an approach would seem a wasteland for trying to live a life. Now, for me, and this is just my personal perspective, I love to meet people that are perfectionists or that are obsessed by something. Those in many ways are my favorite friends and my favorite, acquaintances, you might call it. People that are wired maybe a little bit differently. Because, and I would say this, because they're very often the ones with the fewest excuses of why something can't be done. And you want to make sure that the influences around you are helping you to sort of chase down what you're trying to get. And I really like these words that I've got here from Kobe that really speak to a little bit of this. This is almost the kind of conclusion for us as to why chase perfectionism. Kobe said, "I was chasing perfection and excellence, even though I know I'll probably never catch it. But just the fact that I was willing to chase it, I would defeat most of my opponents, because most of my opponents wouldn't chase something that didn't have any guarantees attached to it." Which is kind of cool. And so now let's talk about element number 6. And this paragraph very much sets the stage. And so, by the way, this is from 1999. Kobe said, "From an enthusiasm aspect and his love to play, I'm more like my father. But on the court, I'm more like my mother. She's like a pit bull, very competitive. So I got the best of both worlds," he said. And so element number 6, one of my favorites, the killer instinct. The killer instinct. I mean, I'm telling you, when I study this particular element in a champion, it just takes all of my attention, because I love to understand about the killer instinct. I'm going to tell you a little brag. I might even say that I'm becoming somewhat of an expert on this subject. And so I want to, again, share a little bit of the origin behind this and tell some more things about it. And so back to the book, it said, this is about Kobe's mother. "She had the look of a runway model, a beautiful girl. I'm sure her father expected her to marry a doctor or a lawyer. He never expected her to marry a pro basketball player from Southwest Philadelphia. Yet the pairing would merge 2 deep basketball gene pools. Pam's brother, John Arthur Cox, nicknamed Chubby, was a high school All-American guard who later played college ball." And then this next paragraph's key. "Yet neither Joe, Kobe's father, nor Chubby, Pam's brother, could provide the key personality elements that would make Kobe Bryant one of the game's all-time great competitors. That killer is Pam Cox, man. That killer is Pam Cox," explained Mo Howard. He was a trainer. With a laugh, an opinion repeated time and again amongst the couple's friends. "She's a beautiful woman, but there's a side to her that's a cold-blooded killer." Cold-blooded killer. I just think of that. I just love it. To think that Kobe, the elements we've been talking about, he's getting discipline, perfectionism, and now the killer instinct. I mean, what a trifecta that is. And as I just mentioned, I love studying the killer instinct in these top champions, because one thing that stood out to me about Kobe, it's all connected to intensity. And that's why many champions, the best of the best, they can't hold on to this killer instinct for a long period of time because it takes a lot of energy, a lot of intensity. And so I think actually the killer instinct is more of a unique trait than most people would immediately recognize. Another way I could describe it, because I'm going to share this paragraph here, and the note that I made, it's too hot to handle for many people because it comes with its fair share of side effects. And so evidence of this, it said Kobe laughed deeply when HBO's Real Sports confronted him with former teammate Steve Nash's declaration that Bryant was a mother effing a-hole. I mean, from a teammate perspective, that was true about Kobe because he was so intense. And this was a trait actually that, yes, Steve Nash is talking about when Kobe was in the NBA, but this trait started a long time before Kobe reached the NBA. And case in point, I want to share this perspective from one of Kobe's high school coaches. We'll go to his high school coach quite often, actually. But he said this: Kobe was probably the most focused kid I'd ever seen on the court. No bullshit, no taking it easy. He's not going to smile at you. He's going to kill you from bell to bell. No mercy, the coach said. He doesn't give an F. He's a straight alpha male. And so I want to build a little bit more on both this alpha male, but especially the killer instinct. And so I read this article in USA Today, and it was talking about one of Kobe's high school teammates. And so he said, when we were on the team bus, Kobe would boast that even Jordan couldn't stop him, just as a teenager, 15, 16 years old. And so the teammate said, I still think that would be crazy for an NBA player to say that right now. But he was always looking for the next challenge, always trying to drive himself, as we heard earlier, this iron will. And then to build on this killer instinct, back to this interview that Shaq did with Kobe. Shaq asked Kobe, so where did you get the killer instinct from as a basketball player? And so Kobe said, it had a lot to do with isolation. Growing up over there in Italy, we'll talk more about Italy in a moment. Growing up over there in Italy and being the only African-American kid, that means in his town and at his school. Also, not being able to speak the language, I gravitated towards the game. And in that game, you find solace. Then, when you play with the kids that might not accept you because you're an outsider, then you get your chance to get vengeance on them for not accepting me. And that's where it started developing, Kobe said. And one of the things that I love about Kobe Bryant and the mindset that we're discussing, the way that I could describe it to you, how can I say it? When you've got this high level of killer instinct, it allows you to press down on the throat of your opponents. And it's surprising, not many people are prepared to do this. Maybe even subconsciously they lighten up when they're winning, but not Kobe, not these killers. Even when they're winning, think of Tiger Woods. He doesn't want to win by 5. He wants to win by 10. Kobe had this. Jordan had it. Larry Bird had it. I've seen it in the F1 race car driver, Ayrton Senna. He's going to make a great podcast. And I've definitely seen it in the world of Tom Brady. He's much more of a quieter killer. But man, he's got it. He's got it. We're going to do an amazing episode on him. As I mentioned, Tiger Woods has got it. What Tiger learned from his father's military background, and also he got this killer instinct from his mother as well. It's going to be fascinating to share with you some details on him. And talking about influential parents and fathers in particular, I think about the Venus and Serena, the Williams sisters, what they got from their father Richard. And it's kind of interesting because Venus didn't have that killer instinct the same way as Serena did. Serena out there on the court, she was cutthroat. She was taking no prisoners. And so, man, it is fun to really understand this killer instinct. And if you don't know much about it and you're not winning currently, learn as much as you can about it because it will change things for you. And to to kind of end this with Kobe, to switch our attention back to him, there's this final line that I want to tell you that is so great in the biography. It said this: in terms of Bryant's achievements, and this is especially when he's a teenager, in terms of Bryant's achievements, it's fair to say in many ways, the mother made the man. The mother made the man. It's so unbelievably true in his life. And okay, so we come to the end of that section. Let me just pause for a second because we're about to shift gears. Now we're going to talk about element number 7. And this is true fundamentals. True fundamentals. Now, to the uninformed, I would say fundamentals can often seem quite boring. Maybe like vanilla ice cream. But to the great ones, they really take a lot of pride in getting the fundamentals right, almost like they recognize the power of simplicity. And so Kobe loved the fundamentals. And so I want to share with you this. But as I said, we'd talk about Italy a little bit. So in 1984, Kobe's father was on the verge of walking away from basketball altogether because he'd fallen out of favor with all these different NBA teams that he played for. Then he gets an offer pretty much out of nowhere to come play in the Italian Basketball League. It was basically a newly formed league. So he had to make the decision, was he going to uproot the family and move them out of the States? I mean, this is a big and bold move to move across the ocean to Europe. But this would prove a pivotal moment in Kobe's life because once the decision was made and the Bryants were moving to Italy, by the way, they ended up in a town about 50 miles just outside of Rome. And actually part of the package for Kobe's father was a brand new BMW, an Italian cottage with a garden, and obviously a main spot on one of the rosters of these, one of the better Italian teams. And so what I'll tell you about this, and the biography does an amazing job at really taking us behind the scenes here, but this would give Kobe what I might describe as almost a unique advantage. I actually love the term of an environment advantage because he was able to get, the word that I thought of was an apprenticeship. The Italian league was not as intense as the NBA. So Kobe was able to sort of follow his father around, be at games, be on the team bus, go to practices, sit on the edge of the court, and it would just be an incredible apprenticeship into professional basketball. And so I want to talk a little bit about the fundamentals. So the book tells us this. Kobe started school in Italy just weeks after his 6th birthday. His sisters, so he's got 2 older sisters, were 7 and 8. The Bryants found an easy adjustment there. The team provided them with housing and a car. They didn't know the language, but the children spent afternoons teaching each other through word games. Within months, they found a comfort level in a world vastly different from the one they'd left behind. It would be an important bonding experience for the clan. We were very comfortable there, Kobe would remember. We fell right in. That's the kind of attitude we developed in Italy. The backbone is family. The backbone. I mean, family meant everything to Kobe. It's actually some strange things that happened with his relationship with his parents, but especially his girls and his wife, Vanessa, what that meant to him. We'll come on to that later in the series. But so now we get to fundamentals, and it told us this. Each pro team also had its own youth team, and playing on the youth team and going to practices with his father rapidly built the base of his understanding of the game. In retrospect, it said, his time in Italy became the most comprehensive basketball school you could imagine. Kobe said, I started playing basketball over there, which was great because I learned the fundamentals first. I think most kids who grow up here in America learn all the fancy dribbling. In Italy, they teach you the true fundamentals and leave out all of the nonsense. And then it finished. At every turn, there seemed an acute awareness of the nonsense that had undone his father. Again, that's a key line because that's speaking to both the nonsense of trying to be too fancy on the court, but especially the nonsense of off the court activities, because Kobe was very mature for his age. I mean, he would be on the bus, the team bus, and, the other players said that Kobe would be asking questions. And it was interesting, even at sort of 6, 7, 8 years old, how he could switch from sort of being a kid and then switch into this mature mindset where he could hold a conversation with the other players. And so he knew there was a reason that they were in Italy, and it was because his father didn't make it on the biggest stage. Now, to build on these fundamentals, I saw this interview with Kobe that just this couple of lines are just great. He said, "You have to learn the building blocks, every little step, all of the fundamentals. What would make your game most unstoppable? And now we work backwards from there." Now we work backwards from there. I actually think that's quite a good idea. Use it in the fundamentals, but in almost any area of life, figure out where you want to go and then work backwards from there. Now, the next thing in my notes here, I've got a fun little story to tell you from this basketball coach called Alan Stein Jr. And so he had the opportunity, I saw this talk that he gave. And so he spoke about this pivotal moment that really changed his life, a lesson that he learned from Kobe. And so he said, in 2007, Nike flew me out to LA. This is this guy, Stein Jr. talking. Nike flew me out to LA for the first ever Kobe Bryant Skills Academy. They decided that they were going to take some of the best high school and college players from around the country, and they were going to run this 3-day mini camp. So he said, I'd always heard this urban legend of how insane, how intense Kobe's individual workouts were. And so I figured whilst I was at the camp, this was my chance to witness it for myself firsthand. So the guy went up to Kobe and said, "Can I watch one of your sessions?" Kobe said, "Yes, tomorrow at 4 a.m. Gave him a wink. So this guy goes back to his hotel and he thinks, right, if I've got to be there at 4 a.m., this is my chance to impress him, so I might as well be there at 3:30. So he turns up at the gym and he's in the dark, but he can already hear the squeak of the sneakers and the ball bouncing on the hardwood. And so he said he'd foiled my plan to beat him to the gym. So the guy comes in, sits down and starts watching the training session. And he said, for the next 45 minutes, I watched the best player in the world do some of the most basic footwork and offensive moves. Kobe was doing stuff that I routinely taught the middle school players that I coached. And so he said, later I got the opportunity to speak to Kobe. So I said, Kobe, I don't understand. You're the best player in the world. Why are you doing such basic drills? Kobe smiled at him and said, with all seriousness, why do you think I'm the best player in the world? Why do you think I'm the best player in the world? Because I never get bored, he said, with the basics. A lot of these points to chew on. A lot of these points, I can tell you just how much they've affected the way I go about my work. Maybe points like this could change your entire approach to something. I just think this is a great lesson. Come back to simplicity. So now with that said, let's continue on the Kobe timeline. So now at 8 or 9 years old, it gives us a sort of an example of the experience, of the environment that Kobe was able to sort of get around. And this is just a great few paragraphs from the book. So I want to share all of this. This will help you to understand Kobe's young life in Italy. So it said, Vittori, that was one of Kobe's young friends, met Kobe that first year when they were both mop boys for the team, mopping up the sweat and sweeping up debris from the floor during pauses in action. Obviously, this is at the pro games his father's playing in. Being a ball boy got me closer to the game, Kobe remembered. I was able to get a feel for the speed and how physical the game was. Those who saw him remembered Kobe as a kid who loved the spotlight, so much so that he might take to mopping the floor even when it wasn't necessary because he liked performing before the crowd. At half-time, Kobe would take to the empty court to conduct his shadow games, shooting and dribbling routines, often to the applause and wonderment of an enthusiastic crowd, who were waving flags, singing songs, and doing anything to urge father and son on. And then it said, during the timeouts, the ref would toss me the ball, Kobe recalled. I would dribble around a little bit, go out there on the court, do a layup, take a free throw until the players came back onto the court. At every one of our games at half time, it was the Kobe show, said Leon Douglas, one of Joe's teammates, with a laugh. So fun. And if you're watching this, I'll show you a little bit of footage of Kobe sat courtside. But I mean, all of this came back down to these fundamentals. And so this whole part, I was really fascinated, to be honest, to learn about Kobe's upbringing. And, I mentioned he had the good fortune to be in this unique environment. But now I want to share with you element number 8, because this is for Kobe, where that good fortune would end, if you like. And now this would come down to squeezing every last ounce out of his talent. And so let me set up this element for us, number 8, because I saw this interview with former NBA player Richard Jefferson, and he just said this great line I want to share. He said, Kobe showed what an absurd, psychotic work ethic can get you. Kobe showed what an absurd, psychotic work ethic can get you. And I was just struck by the same thing. And so element number 8 is work ethic. Now, obviously, we've just heard this 3 a.m. story. Kobe's at the gym before this coach. But what I can tell you, page after page, story after story, interview after interview, this was one of the most defining factors of this guy, the work ethic that he would put in, especially when you compare it to other people inside the NBA. And actually, one of my single favorite lines of all my notes, Kobe said this: you always want to outwork your potential. Always want to outwork your potential. And he finished up by saying, as hard as you believe you can work harder than that. It's just great words, simple words. Outwork your potential. What I love about that takes away the excuse, if you're naturally talented, that you don't have to work as hard as somebody else. And back to the high school coach, because this explains Kobe didn't fall for any of that nonsense. So it told us that fall at Lower Merion, Downer, and so Downer was Kobe's high school coach and Lower Merion was his high school. That fall at Lower Merion, they discovered that Bryant had a startling work ethic. He pushed himself through a grueling self-improvement schedule that included road work, weights, and seemingly non-stop basketball at team practices. He was determined to never lose a drill or contest. This is crazy. He was determined to never lose a drill or contest, and for almost 4 years, he would maintain a perfect record in that regard. It's amazing. 4 years. Let me say this. Kobe understood very early on how to push himself at this 100% mark. And I think what's amazing, you might be watching this and this isn't a judgment, but maybe you've never pushed yourself 100%. And that is what I'd love you to take away from Kobe, because it actually makes me ask myself the question, and maybe you can ask yourself the question, how often do you give 100%? How long do you give 100% for? Is it 10 seconds, 10 minutes, 10 hours? What I think is most people never discover how to get the best out of themselves. And I think learning about Kobe Bryant, it allows you to tap into something you may never have tapped into before. And I just think the true origin behind his work ethic, I discovered this little secret, this movie that inspired Kobe. So Kobe said this: Rudy was one of my favorite films growing up. After watching that film, by the way, Rudy's from 1993. After watching that film, I came to understand if I could work that hard every day. So I made a promise to myself that when I do retire, I'd have no regrets. So this Rudy work ethic, it encapsulated everything about the way this guy went about his business. Kobe didn't leave anything to chance. And when he was playing a practice game, It was like he was playing in the NBA finals. Kobe believed that you worked harder in practice than even you did in a game. And, as I mentioned, very few people operate like this, and there's so much to learn about this mindset. And so I want to tell you a little bit about this movie, Rudy. Maybe you haven't seen it, because it's this heartwarming tale about this guy who basically had very little physical or natural ability, both when it came to sports and academics. And so nobody in his family before had been to college. And so he's determined not just to go to Notre Dame, but also to be a walk-on at the football team. So he goes to the tryouts, and he just gets the kicked out of him every single session, but he never quits. He never gives up. This movie, it is almost the ultimate story of perseverance. And what I love about Rudy, and it's sort of quite emotional to think how much Kobe sort of took from this particular movie, is that this kid Rudy had this relentless approach. He just refused to give up. And he really impacted the coaches and the other players on the team, because Rudy just had this massive heart. He didn't have any excuses. And I just think, you've got to go watch this movie, because that's the type of attitude that each one of us, if we take that into our life, oh my God, life becomes so different when you don't have excuses, when you won't give up, and when you find a way to give your all. And so listen to what Kobe's high school coach says, because Kobe had found this secret as a teenager. The coach said, "He worked harder than any other kid I've ever seen. Pro, college, high school, whatever. He was the hardest working basketball player ever. He wanted it, this final part. He wanted it more than anybody else." He wanted it more than anybody else. That was all the Rudy qualities that we just spoke about. And to build on this, I want to go back to Tim Grover's words, because he makes a phenomenal point here. A great understanding of these champions. Grover told us this. When people talk about Kobe's greatness, they often say he put in the work. True, but they're missing the point. This is quite subtle, but I hope I explain it correctly. But they're missing the point. Players like MJ and Kobe, they didn't just work, they consistently and constantly elevated the work. Let that sink in, because what he's talking about here, these guys, they don't just go to training to work. They do it with a level of effort and obsession that other players are just not even thinking about, let alone actually executing on. They have this capacity to push themselves to the maximum over and over again. Obviously, I've shared a lot of things in this opening to Kobe Bryant, but imagine I only had 5 minutes to share with somebody the essence of what Kobe Bryant is all about. I think I would let them watch this interview that I'm going to tell you about. I must have watched this 50 times in my life, and probably 20 or 30 times whilst I was researching for this episode. I kept going back. I wanted to understand, what is it that makes this guy different? How is he able to drive himself like this every single day? So Kobe, in this interview, he's talking about the Mamba mentality and how this affects his work ethic. So he was talking about other players at the Lakers, other players in the league, and how he was gaining an advantage over them. So he said that most players only train twice a day, but listen to how Kobe is going to get an advantage over them. He said this.
Now imagine you wake up at 3, you train at 4, you go 4 to 6, come home, breakfast, relax, blah, blah, blah. Now you're back at it again, 9 to 11, right? You relax, and now all of a sudden you're back at it again, 2 to 4, and now you're back at it again, 7 to 9. Look how much more training I have done by simply starting at 4, right? And so now you do that, and as the years go on, the separation that you have with your competitors and your peers just grows larger and larger and larger and larger and larger. And by year 5 or 6, doesn't matter what kind of work they do in the summer, they're never going to catch up.
I love to see people that enjoy hard work. I think about my own work ethic. I'm a hard worker. I'm somebody who puts in a lot of hours, no matter what it is I'm doing. I'm obsessive. And I've actually heard this term. I remember an old girlfriend's father saying to me, work smarter, not harder. So I always thought about that. But the other day, I saw this brilliant interview with Lex Friedman. He was interviewing this guy called Michael Polson. He's basically a programmer. And they were talking about this kind of philosophy of work smarter, not harder. And this guy gave me an understanding of this that I'd never heard before. And I just think it's truly brilliant. And so this is what he said. The problem is, it assumes that you already know what smarter is. Like there's an easy, obvious path that you can just take. And I've never found that to be true, he said. Everything I've ever done was hard. Most of the time, I don't even know what I'm doing. So the only way I've learned how to work smart is by working very, very hard. There are no shortcuts, he said. I just think that is such a powerful framework that yes, you would love to be able to work smart, but the only way you get to that smartness is by working ridiculously hard and almost never believing that there's a shortcut. And I mean, that I think is especially true in athletics, for an athlete. You know, maybe in business you can find a shortcut, but Kobe was almost the proof that to really get the best out of yourself, you need to put in those lonely hours. And I was really excited to get to this story because this story just gives us a glimpse into Kobe Bryant's world in a way that few other stories does. Now, what I will say, this is a story that I actually found when I was researching on Reddit. Now, you might think to yourself, that might not be the most accurate source for a story, so you might even question the validity of this. But I'm telling you, when you've studied Kobe like I have, gone down the rabbit hole, I believe this to be 100% true. I'll be interested to see if you agree. So this story was about one of the trainers for the US team. He was called Rob. He talks about this crazy encounter down in Vegas when the US team were getting ready for their summer training camp. Basically, they were getting ready for some upcoming pre-qualifiers for the Olympic Games. And so this coach talked about in the past, he'd had the opportunity to work with some of the game's greatest. But this was the first time that he had the opportunity to work out with Kobe, the Black Mamba. If you didn't know, that was Kobe's self-proclaimed nickname. So Kobe had asked him for his number and said maybe they could do some extra training together. So the night before the first scrimmage, think of that, the night before the first scrimmage, the trainer's phone goes off. He nervously picks it up and he hears Kobe's voice. Kobe says, "Hey Rob, just wondering, could you help me get in some extra conditioning work?" So Rob checks his clock and it's 4:15 a.m. So Rob says it takes him about 20 minutes to get down to the training facility. By the time he gets down there, Kobe looks like he's already taken a swim. He's drenched in sweat. So for the next couple of hours, they put in some more conditioning work. And then Rob goes back to his room because they're meeting the entire team and the training staff have got to be back down at the training facility for 11 a.m. So he's feeling a little sleep deprived when he gets back down there and he sees some of the other players. So you've got LeBron, he's talking with D Wade, they're chatting with Coach K, he's the head coach. And then suddenly, almost goosebumps, he looks over to the other side of the gym and guess who's still over there shooting jumpers? Damn right, Kobe. So Rob is kind of shocked. So he goes over and this is what the conversation looks like. He says, "Hey Kobe, good work this morning. What time did you finish?" So Kobe says, "Finish what?" He said, "What time did you finish getting your shots up?" And Kobe says, "Oh, just now. I wanted to make sure that I made 800 shots before I left the gym." And so Rob was like, oh my God. My jaw just dropped. There was no surprise why this guy has been so effective throughout his career. He said, all of it, the whole legend, the urban legend of Kobe, hit me like a train in that moment. Now, what I'll tell you when I reflect on that story, it's stories like that that made me want to start this podcast. Because when I was learning things like this for myself, I just realized the impact that stories like this can have on the way you go about your business. And, what I'll tell you is, if you're anything like me, and, most probably you are because you're listening to this, learning information, great information like this, it really changes the way that I go about improvement, the way I go about my business, the way I go about any aspect of my life. It really makes a significant difference. Knowledge really does. And I mean, not to mention the fact that it gives me a buzz. I mean, it certainly gives me a buzz to share this with you now, because I just think maybe this, more than any other story, helped me to really understand the way this guy thinks about trying to improve himself. And he's already arguably the best player in the NBA at this point in time in 2008, the best player in that squad. And so, I love the fact that Kobe didn't rest on his laurels. He was always pushing. And so I wanted to take us back to something that Tim Grover spoke about. And so this is what he said. Because I tell you why I'm sharing this, because I want to try and give you a 360 view on Kobe, because this is almost a negative side of working too hard, especially when Kobe got into the latter part of his career. So Grover said, Kobe was at his best when I could get him to stop. You need to work out less and sleep more, I would tell him. Too many people around Kobe feared him and didn't want to address this issue, but it was essential to keep him performing at the highest level. And then he said, everyone saw Kobe as relentless. They saw him as this workout guy. But when you're able to curtail some of that and control it, that's when he started to excel at a higher level, Grover said. So I don't want this to stop you trying these 3 a.m., 4 a.m. workouts. But I think this is an interesting point, because Grover went on to say in another interview that I saw with him that Kobe was the hardest worker he'd ever been around, but Jordan was more efficient. And so that's probably the closest we'll ever get to working smarter rather than harder on this Champions podcast, because you really need to mix those. I mean, it's not like Jordan wasn't prolific in his work ethic. So, I think the main thing to take away is that don't be afraid to work hard for a long period of time. And I've also got a note here that I wanted to say. I like Tim Grover very much because he's a real straight shooter. He doesn't talk any BS. He cuts right to the chase because he realizes that voice in your head is already tough enough to overcome. And so he wants to tell you the actual truth. And that's why a lot of people can't take this kind of information, because it's too direct. They don't like the intensity it puts them under. But I've got to tell you, if you haven't read any of Grover's books, go read Relentless. Then if you can, read his next book, Winning, because just reading these 2 books alone might just change your mindset and help your performance. Get used to hearing the truth, though. That's what I'll say. Now, actually, this next element really speaks to Kobe, really speaks to Jordan, Tim Grover. And this, element number 9, is obsession. Now, I feel like we've already been talking about this, but I wanted to give each one of these elements their own little time in the light, if you like. And so this next bit in the biography was a fascinating glimpse for me into what Kobe was like as a 10, 11, 12-year-old before he turns into a teenager. And so we're going to go back to the young friend that we heard about earlier. This was Vittori. But all of this section was talking about that players would say to Kobe that you might be good over here in Italy, but once you get back to America, you won't be so good. It's a different game over there, they would say. And so what I think is interesting, even when you've got a couple of friends, some of them might be on your side, but some of the parents or, other people in your circle, they actually don't want you to succeed, because crazy in this human mind of ours, people think your success makes them look bad. And so they would rather that you failed. So let's talk about a little bit of not failure, but this learning that Kobe had to go through first of all. And I'm going to tell you, when I first read this in the biography, man, I almost didn't believe it. And so basically every summer, Kobe and his family would come back from Italy to Philadelphia, and he would play in the summer leagues. And so the book talked about Kobe went an entire schedule without scoring a single basket, not one, it said. Yes, he was playing up against older kids, but he was crushed, it told us. And then there was this one bit, and I mean, if you're a parent, this is an unbelievable bit of parenting that his father came up and did to him. And so I'm going to share it with you because this was from the interview I mentioned earlier with Charlie Rose. And so I want to take us to Kobe's words rather than the words from the book. So Kobe said, "I'm playing in the summer league and I don't score a single point, not 1 point, not a free throw, not a layup, not a steal, nothing. And my father came up to me afterwards. He gave me a hug and said, 'Son, don't worry about it. We're going to love you if you score 0 or 50. I just remember thinking, thank you.'" I think that is a really nice moment. And as I said, this family dynamic, it plays such a big role. And I think the thing that it made me think, if you let results dictate too much about the way you think about yourself, it can really begin to crush you. You almost have to be, of course, you have to consider what's happening out there on the court or the field or in the cage, on the course, whatever. But you need to develop this level of belief and confidence that, as Tim Grover said, that never wavers. I think it's a sneaky bit of great advice. And then the book also shares another powerful moment, because during these summer leagues, the young players were asked to fill out application forms. And so the counselors would review the player applications, and they noticed for Kobe that under career plans, he had listed NBA. And so the book told us, this answer represented just the kind of unrealistic attitude the league wanted to guard against. It was the mission of the league to build the confidence in the young players while at the same time forcing them to see the light, basically to be realistic. So one of the counselors made it a point to admonish Kobe. Only 1 in a million make it to the NBA, the counselor said. So you have to plan on a future other than basketball. I'm going to be that 1 in a million, Kobe allegedly replied. After all, he explained, Magic Johnson had done it. Michael Jordan had done it. Why not him? Why not him? And then it finished. It was just the level of confidence and expectation that his father had encouraged in him. He had been raised to not see himself as an average young player. And when I made this note, it made me think of a great sports movie, Without Limits, from 1998, all about the legendary runner Steve Prefontaine. Go Pre. And so this is what it said in the movie. This is what Steve Prefontaine said. The hardest thing in the world is to believe in something. If you do, it's a miracle. It's a miracle. I like little lines like this because you have to keep believing. You have to not give up on yourself. Back to the book, because I really want to keep developing this root of obsession. Because, Kobe's first obsession with basketball, but definitely his second obsession was winning. And so it told us this. He was so serious about everything that he did as far as sports was concerned, always so intense. The mentality of Kobe was concentrated to win, win, win. The rest of the kids just wanted to play, and I was like, I want to win. And then it said he realized he could take over games by himself when he was young, maybe 9 or 10 years old, playing in the little leagues. When the game was on the line and you're put in that situation, when your back's against the wall, I come out fighting. It's that fight or flight mentality, Kobe said, and I've always been a fighter. Always been a fighter. You know, this hunger to win and not being satisfied. You know, more than a year ago, I was watching the Arnold Schwarzenegger docuseries on Netflix, and there was a line that really hit me. Arnold said, I will always stay hungry, never satisfied with current accomplishments. Now, do I believe in that? Definitely. You know, it's almost can you really enjoy the results and then keep pushing forwards? It's a difficult balance. You know, it almost comes back to what we spoke about at the start of this episode, this chip on the shoulder that's always driving them forwards. And so, you know, Kobe had this even as a 9 or 10-year-old. And so then in my notes here, to sort of build on this winning mentality, I just wanted to take us for a second to Kobe's autobiography, The Mamba Mentality. And so Pau Gasol wrote the foreword or the introduction in that book. And I just want to share some of his words because he gives us a great insight for what we're discussing right now. Gasol told us this: a lot of people have wondered how difficult it must have been to have played with Kobe. It really wasn't. All you needed to understand was where he was coming from and what he was all about and how badly he wanted to win. He would challenge players and coaches to match his intensity, his desire to bring the very best out every single day. Not just in games, this is key, not just in games, but in practices, as we spoke about earlier with this Rudy work ethic. And then this final bit, he wanted to find out what you were made of and if he could count on you to help him win. Plain and simple. You know, what I've seen in so many champions, they're obsessed with winning, getting over the line, because ultimately that's the hardest thing. They don't want to come second. They don't want a good performance. They want to win. And it's this intensity that helps you get over the line. It's why I love learning about the killer instinct. It's why I love learning about these champions. And Kobe Bryant had it big time. And so this was an interesting paragraph because this really feeds into how all of this is built. And so this is now Kobe as a teenager, and it said, his time in a foreign land, of course Italy, had already begun to reinforce this isolationist nature that Kobe shared with his mother, spurred along by his desire to shoot alone and work on his game. It was Pam, not Joe, who finally made an effort to put up a hoop at their residence, which hastened both his singular pursuit of the game as well as his tendency to isolate himself from other children. Now, I'm sure this comes as no surprise. Kobe was like a lone wolf out in Italy. And then when he got back to the US, because he didn't really understand the culture of these American teenagers, so it was difficult for him to fit in. And then even when he joins the Lakers as a teenager, all the other guys are sort of in their early 20s. They're men, basically. So Kobe's not old enough to drink. He doesn't want to party. So again, this puts him in an environment where he's a lone wolf. And so he had to learn to embrace this aspect. But I do want to say, again, these are all just my opinions. But even if you play in a team sport, if you're going to get the best out of yourself, you have to embrace this isolationist nature, as it told us. You've got to be able to work alone when nobody's watching, put in the reps, develop your skills, do it without encouragement. Don't rely on encouragement. And so, you know, that might not make you the most sociable person, but at the end of the day, you have to ask yourself, do I want to win or do I want to be liked? And Kobe had made his decision. And that leads me, I wrote down here one of the most powerful lines in the book. It's a great line, a line that I can't get out of my mind. It said, in Kobe's world, you're either on the train or you're on the track. Basically, you're moving forwards with him or you're against him. No in between. Now, it tells a story that speaks to this obsession, this coldness that we spoke earlier about that he gets from his mother. So it was talking about a particular high school playoff defeat in 1994, and yet 5 years later, Kobe still considered this one of his most painful losses of his entire life. Even though he, dominated the game in so many respects, he scored 33 points, but he still blamed himself for that loss. And so there's an interesting couple of paragraphs in the book where it starts off. It says, Bryant said he considered that loss one of the most painful experiences of his life. And then this gives us an indication as to Kobe's attitude towards defeat. It tells us many seniors in the team were playing their last game. So this was the game from 94, was playing their last game and were about to leave high school. So the coach tells us I was waiting for Kobe, who's like the leader of the team. I was waiting for him to stand up and say something kind of poetic. But instead, Kobe stands up and says, "For you guys that are leaving, thanks for everything." And then he immediately turns to the guys that were coming back the following year. Whoever's coming back, this can't happen again. You have to do everything that you need to do. This will never happen again under my watch. And the coach said there was a certain coldness to this moment. Now, I saw this coldness over and over again in the book. And so I want to jump us on the timeline. Let's jump in the time machine. We're going to head 15 years into the future because there's another incident that it spoke about in the biography that is so similar to what we just heard. And so Kobe and the Lakers had just lost the last game of the season. So they're in the locker room and the coach is going through all this stuff. Actually, let me just go to the words. It said, the coach is going through all of this usual bullshit. You guys played hard, blah, 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 trying to be positive. So then Kobe interrupts and says to the coach, I've got something to say. He stands up, points around the locker room. You mother effers don't belong on the same court as me. You're all shit, Kobe said, and then just stormed out the locker room. And then there was another line that really conveys this idea. Back to the train again. It said, if you weren't on board, he would clearly convey the idea that he wouldn't hesitate to grab you by the collar and throw you right off the train. I mean, in so many ways, I love the intensity of Kobe. I love so many aspects. But the critique at this point in his career, he hadn't yet learned to be a great teammate. He was so intense. He couldn't understand why someone else on his team wasn't giving 100%. And I actually saw an interview with him where he was talking, he was asked why he doesn't pass the ball to other players. And he said, why would I pass the ball to other players when I know they're not doing the work? It's just that simple. And so if he didn't believe that he could rely on you, he just wouldn't pass you the ball. He'd try and do it himself. And that didn't utilize the triangle offense and team basketball. That's the way that Phil Jackson, so we'll talk about all of this a bit later in other episodes, but that's the way Jackson wanted to play basketball, and Kobe would often be selfish and not play that type of basketball. And as I say, he wasn't a team player, and that would be detrimental for the first decade of his NBA career. But he would have to change this leadership element and becoming a great teammate. And I can't wait to share with you how Kobe did this because it's so valuable. But let's move on because obviously we've covered 9 elements so far. I want to tell you about element number 10. And I mean, of course, we're not going to get to all 25 elements in this episode. We're actually going to get to element number 16 because the next kind of 7 are quite a bit shorter. But this element number 10, this kind of takes my mind back to the Mamba mentality again, because Kobe, man, as I said to you earlier, his North Star was studying the greats. And that is element number 10, studying the greats. And so let's get to... let's go back to the biography. It tells us this, because this is the kind of origin behind where all this started. When he was in Italy, to keep him occupied, his grandparents would send videotapes of TV shows and sporting events. Actually, one of the TV shows was The Cosby Show. Me and my family grew up watching that. But Kobe admitted, what I looked forward to most was getting the basketball games. I used to watch everybody, from Magic to Bird to Michael. I used to watch their moves and then add them to my game. From a very young age, I was devouring film and watching everything I could get my hands on. It was always fun to me, Kobe said. One of the elements that I really enjoy with Kobe is that he's a manic obsessive. I mean, I am as well. When I'm studying something, you know, especially these champions, trying to find what I think of as the most important elements in their life, I will go and look everywhere. And so what was fascinating for Kobe, the way he would study the greats, is that he would just watch hours and hours of footage. And I just think that this is one of the best ways, I think, to develop and improve your game. And what I always think, you know, if you think your competition might be watching 2 hours, go and watch 20 hours, go watch 100 hours, become far more obsessed than they're even thinking about. Because, you know, ultimately the pictures that we carry in our mind, they basically end up becoming our lives. And so this is a really worthwhile activity, studying game tape. Actually, I think it really is one of the quickest ways to improvement. And so the biography went on to describe, soon his dad Joe was subscribing to a service that delivered videos of the games directly. Joe and Kobe, this bit's good. Joe and Kobe would pore over them together, taking notes of all the key subtleties. And then these are my words, but basically from there, Kobe would head out onto the driveway, onto his hoop, and he would practice those moves, trying to perfect everything he was learning. It's a beautiful process. And then it also said an important line in the biography, you know, because Kobe was like a decade ahead of some of the other kids. And so it said the only other players, bear in mind he's talking about the NBA, the only other players that were studying game tape like this were the X's and the O's, the wonks it called them, who served as the assistant coaches for the NBA teams. So, you know, players weren't really studying game tape. And so Kobe was like an innovator. I mean, this is how he would gain an advantage over his competition. And it actually said by age 9, he put together his first scouting tape, which I just think is so good. So now in this bit, you know, of studying the greats, obviously we've mentioned Michael Jordan so many times in this episode. And I want to talk a little bit about how Jordan would come into Kobe's life, onto his radar, because his first idol was Magic Johnson, but actually that was his father's favorite player. But soon enough, Jordan would come into the frame and Kobe would start to get locked in on him. So this paragraph tells us, that summer in 1984, before they departed for Italy, so remember he's only 5 or 6 years old, Kobe watched on TV the US Olympic team getting ready for the games in Los Angeles. The preparation was a series of games against pro players. And so this was the first time that Kobe ever got to witness Michael Jordan. This bit's exciting, I think. I could almost see Kobe on the couch. Kobe said, "This guy dribbles on a fast break and he took off. I think it was over Magic. And he flew past Magic. That's not supposed to happen," Kobe said. "Who is this kid? I don't like this kid because Magic was my guy." And so Kobe said, that was the first time that I saw him, meaning MJ. And so it goes on to say, this was one of my favorite lines in the entire book. Kobe had a closet at home filled with critical research. It held all the VHS tapes of Michael's games. He'd pull them out and study them and then do the moves. "Look at what I added," Bryant would tell his coach. He was studying even harder for that role, it said. Obviously the role as the next Michael Jordan. And so, by the way, I love that term, critical research. And as I said, you know, Kobe was studying all of these players. But what I think Phil Jackson helped him to do almost better than anybody else, to teach him a way to strategically look at the game. And so Kobe went from his obsession of studying other players suddenly to studying his own performance and his own games. And this is a great bit from Grover. So Grover said, sometimes after the game, especially after a loss, Kobe obtained the game film and we'd watch it together. Every moment, every frame. Sometimes we'd be in the car heading to a late dinner, but we'd never end up getting there. We'd just sit in the car analysing what went right and what went wrong. That's how you manage a loss. You tear it apart until it loses its power to happen again. I actually love that. I love that idea that if you've lost, go tear it apart. Really understand why. From a strategic point, from a mentality, from a physical aspect, break it down. Use it as a positive thing in your life rather than it haunting you forever. And so I just think one of the things that I loved about the relationship between Grover and Kobe was obsessed, but Grover backed up that obsession. When you work with top athletes, I've been around a lot of top athletes, you have to be on their schedule. You might be hungrier than you've ever been, but if they're not hungry, you don't eat. And it's something you just got to live with if you want to be around the best. I hope that makes sense. Now, something else that I put here that speaks to these 10 elements that we've been talking about is, think about this. Kobe wasn't the strongest. He wasn't the tallest. He wasn't the fastest. He wasn't the best three-point shooter. What he did do incredibly well was he was always looking for these incremental improvements. And that is what game film, studying the greats, gave him. He got the edge from this element. And yes, he had to go and practice these things, but he was always working on things that worked at the top level. It wasn't just practice for practice sake. It was working on these specific things. And actually, if we go back to the young friend in Italy, and this is what he said about 10-year-old Kobe, he never stopped working at his game. If he wasn't playing the game, he was watching videotapes. Man, I hope you end this episode and get more obsessed about what it is that you love, maybe than you've ever been before. And so to build on this, there was this story that talks about how Kobe was using this obsession, using what he's learning. And so it told this story in the book. It said, we were barking at Kobe one day in a practice scrimmage to front the post. And Kobe said, that's not what I'm going to be doing in the NBA. So he's just in high school right now. That's not what I'm going to be doing in the NBA. And so his teammates barked back at him, well, this isn't the NBA. This isn't the NBA. But what I love about this, I just wrote down here this little saying. Everybody else was playing checkers and Kobe was playing chess. He had seen and watched exactly what the best players in the world were doing. And so he didn't want to practice something that he wouldn't be using in the NBA. And I just love it. And it's summed up in this short line in the biography. It says, when you're breaking down game tape of Magic Johnson and Michael Jordan and many of the other greats, you come to consider them as your teacher. I mean, that's such a great insight. Kobe eventually, when he got in the NBA, would start to build relationships with these ex-players, people that could teach him, better defense, better shooting, whatever element it was. But his study started long before he had relationships with these people. So figure out who you really want to study and then go deep down the rabbit hole. What I'll also say, that is why when you listen to episodes like this, my aim is, this is a masterclass on these champions. This isn't sort of admiring them from afar. This is getting in the weeds, in the dirt, and learning exactly what made them great. And yes, you might listen to this for entertainment, but I really hope there's lots of you out there that are listening to this because you want to improve your performance. I feel like this can be a cheat code. So let's, before we go to element number 11, I want to recap the first 10 elements that we've spoken about. Number 1 was self-belief, iron will, drive, discipline, killer instinct, true fundamentals. Number 8 was work ethic. Then we spoke about obsession. And then number 10 was studying the greats. So now 6 more elements to discuss. And these all really help Kobe get to the top of the Champions Mountain. But this next one, element number 11, is a little bit of an unsung hero at times because it's invisible. And you'll understand what I mean when I tell you. Element number 11 is visualization. So in my notes here, there's 2 parts to this. And to begin with, at least, I want to go to Kobe's words. He's going to shape our understanding. Kobe said, "I would imagine myself playing for the Lakers, the uniforms, the smell of the arena. I always dreamt as a kid that it was possible to score 80, 90, even 100 points. I would lay down in my bed and visualize things. That's how I would go to sleep," he said. Now, I think it's even more impactful, him talking about this visualization and scoring 80 or 90 points, when we fast forward to 2006. In Kobe's NBA career, he would go on to score the second highest total of all time when he scored 81 points when the Lakers played the Raptors. And so what's incredible, Kobe, that's, as I said, the second highest points total by an individual player. And Kobe would also outscore the entire Raptors team on his own in the third quarter when he dropped 27. And so I just think it speaks to the power of this visualization. You imagine something and then you go out there and actually achieve it. As I said, these pictures in our mind end up becoming our lives. And to really build on this, I wanted to share this quote from Phelps because he said something that's kind of similar to what we just heard from Kobe. So Phelps said this: "I visualize to the point where I know exactly what I'm going to do. Dive, glide, stroke, flip, reach the wall, hit the split time to the 100th. Then I swim back again as many times as needed to finish the race." So this is such a recurring theme in so many champions that I've studied, using visualization to sort of prepare for their performances. And, some that are listed down here, Serena Williams, the way she would use it in her practice sessions. Steph Curry, the same thing. Or I think about the skier, Lindsey Vonn, how she would basically visualize all the different twists and turns as she would go down the slope before a race. I've mentioned Tom Brady. He would he would use visualization to walk through particular plays that were going to go down in a game. And Wayne Gretzky actually would use it in a very similar way. Then the other day I was reading this article with the gymnast Simone Biles, and she was talking about, what did she say? "I visualize my routines and see myself executing them flawlessly." And then Usain Bolt, the fastest man on the planet, he would use visualization. He would watch himself, see himself crossing the line over and over again. Then I also wanted to tell you about this little interview quickly from Novak Djokovic. He's a guy that will make an incredible podcast because he's got such a great mind, such an interesting way to approach tennis. Basically, he's turned himself into the GOAT. And so I saw this interview at Wimbledon from a few years ago, and this is what he said. Listen to these words. "It's part of my pre-match routine," obviously talking about visualization. "It's part of my pre-match routine, but I also do it on the court. I think we all do it to some extent, whether it's conscious or unconscious. When you care about something, you want to prepare yourself the best way possible. I'm always visualizing on the change of ends, the next point or the next game." And then listen to what he finishes with because it's pretty key. "The most important and first win that you have to make is the one within yourself. Then whatever happens externally is just a consequence or manifestation of that. But the first win is with yourself." That's such a key thing, and why we're talking so much about mindset and mentality. And we'll finish, before we get to the second part, we'll finish with amazing words from Muhammad Ali. And this is quite a deep quote if you really look at it, because, so I'll share with you his words and I'll just tell you what I was thinking when I saw this. Muhammad Ali said, "The fight is won or lost, far away from witnesses." What I love about that is that really incorporates the physical work, but especially the mental side of things. You need to have done the work before you get in the ring or, on the course or the court. And so I just think that, if you're not fully utilizing visualization right now, Kobe's giving us, and these other champions are giving us a little inspiration, a little direction of how to use it best. And so this second part, this is where we go back to the biography, because there are a few great paragraphs that also speak to this visualization. So to begin with, it said, Joe would often play one-on-one with him when he was available, but with so many hours in the day in Italy dedicated to professional practice, it wasn't humanly possible for his father to play enough to satisfy Kobe's thirst. So he played alone in imaginary games against himself. Shadow basketball, he called it. I played against my shadow. And then it finished by saying, that, of course, involved intense visualization of the NBA stars he'd stored in his imagination from the video screen. His pursuits were strikingly similar to those of Jerry West 4 decades earlier. What I'll just say about that line there with Jerry West. Jerry West was a guy that practiced and was chasing perfection. And so when he saw that in Kobe, that was one of the traits that made him think, I'm going to bring this high school kid to the Lakers. But I really hope the pattern that I'm helping to sort of outline here is this is what the best champions do. They really use this visualization to enhance their performance. And obviously it mentioned in that last paragraph, Kobe would play these shadow games of basketball. And I actually saw this interview where Shaq was saying in the early days with Kobe at the Lakers, when he was in the locker room before a game, he would actually be rehearsing his moves without a ball. And I just love the fact that Kobe wasn't worried about other people's opinions or laughing at him. He had a process and he stuck to it. And I think it's another shout out to only care about people's opinions that want you to win. Anybody who's got anything negative to say, almost learn just to block it out. Very rarely does that type of influence over you help you. As I say, because people actually want you to lose. So going back to the book, this is also great. The wording here that Roland Lazenby uses, I just love it. I love it. So it said, Bryant had lived his life as if on a mythical quest. The only way he could keep his whole dream going was to work harder and harder, to spin his fantasies around and around until they wrapped him tightly in a new reality. Visualization was immense for that. It drove his many hours of solitary practice time in America as it had in Italy. He took to playing entire games alone on the court in his own personal practice right before he played them for real in front of audiences. Perhaps no player has ever made more use of his imagination, Sports Illustrated once said of Kobe Bryant. Perhaps no player has ever made more use of his imagination. I don't have to really add anything to that. And then I want to talk a little bit about how visualization leans into goals. And so this is from another one of Kobe's favorite teammates, Derek Fisher. This is what he said in the book. From day one, he knew the things that he wanted to accomplish in his career. He already had that in his mind. It was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy for him. If he sees something, he can go and get it, Fisher told us. When he entered the league, he had all of these things in mind. He wanted to be an all-star, he wanted to be a starter, and he wanted to average 20 points a game. All of those things, Fisher said, Kobe went on to actually achieve. When I was reading these paragraphs, I made a note. I can't remember if I heard Tim Ferriss say this in person or whether I read it in his book. But Tim Ferriss was talking about the young boxer, Evander Holyfield. And he goes to his coach one day and his coach says to him, you could be the next Muhammad Ali. Do you want to do that? And Evander Holyfield said something funny like, I need to go ask my mom. So he comes back the next day and says, yes, I want to do that. And so the coach said this thing to him, which I just think is amazing. He said to young Evander Holyfield, is that a dream or a goal, because there's a difference. And the difference is that a dream is great, but a goal's almost military in its execution. The way you plan out what you're going to do, and then you go and execute those steps, as I say, with sort of a military obsession and that dedication. And so that's the difference between a dream and a goal. So, really figure out what your goals are and don't just keep them as dreams. I think there's a lot of power in that. Kobe was hunting his down, obviously, as we just heard, one by one. So now we come to element number 12, and I'm just going to get straight into this. And actually, this is relentless. So this is what we're doing in this episode. We're relentless on the things that made Kobe so special. And so I want to actually start things by going to Tim Grover's book, Relentless, because Grover did a nice thing actually where he explained the 3 levels of the athletes that he'd been around. And so the first stage was what he would call the cooler. And he said they're good, however, they let others decide if they're successful. They wait for a compliment to know they did something right. Obviously, that was not Kobe Bryant. So the next level was a closer. Grover said they're great, they feel successful once they close the deal, but they stop once they've achieved it. Remember, we spoke about that earlier. These champions, they just keep on going. So that brings us to the third and final level in Grover's eyes. He calls these a cleaner. They're unstoppable. This was Kobe Bryant, he said. They never feel like they've achieved success because there's always more to do. They're relentless, focused, and internally driven. A cleaner has the guts and the vision to steer everything to their advantage. When you're a cleaner, when you're relentless, when you're driven to be the best, how you do anything is how you do everything. That is a great definition of Kobe Bryant. How you do anything is how you do everything. Again, these episodes, they help me to raise my own standards. Your standards almost can never be high enough. You can always be learning more. There's so many different elements to our lives. And so, it's one of the big things that stood out to me about the Kobe Code is that Kobe lived these principles. He was relentless. He developed his mindset. And he did this every single day. And so he has become for me someone that I think about a lot because it helps to get more out of myself. If I'm feeling a little tired or if I'm feeling like, I don't know if I can do this, I really do reference Kobe and what I've learned from him. And so this idea of being relentless is big, I think. And so I want to kind of keep going on our Kobe timeline. And so this was kind of interesting because we're going to go back to 1991 or kind of forward as we're following this, because now Kobe's 13 years old. And one of the people that he was up against said in the book that he had this Philadelphia toughness and the mentality that he would never back down. And this story when Kobe was 13 really emphasizes this. And so it tells us this. This is from the biography. And so I believe this to be true. Bryant had shot up to well over 6 feet tall and was startlingly thin with long arms that snaked out from his slim shoulders. So now Kobe and the family are back in the US. They've moved away from Italy back to the US permanently. So now Kobe's got to go to a US high school. And of course, he's going to have to prove himself to these American kids. And so it's said in the biography that his first opportunity would come on the first day of school. This is almost like a movie. So it said this. He was eating lunch in the cafeteria on the first day in his 8th grade when another boy walked up to him and stood over him. I hear you're pretty good at basketball, the boy said. Well, to be the man, you've got to beat the man. So Kobe went on to say, I played him after school and I shut him down and got my respect there and then. And then there was a player called Donnie Carr. He was one of the high school opponents, and also he played in the Sunny Hill Leagues. And so this is what he told us about Kobe. He loved challenges. Like if you started to talk to him, and that means trash talk, if you started to talk to him, he would get really locked in and focused. You could just see the determination on his face, and he would start playing harder and harder. He would look for anything to motivate and challenge himself. Now, we can't not mention, we're back to Jordan again. If you've seen The Last Dance, Kobe obviously modeled himself on Jordan. And anytime somebody said something about these players, they would use this chip on the shoulder to make them play harder. And I really think if you can learn how to use this chip on the shoulder, it can become an amazing source of fuel in your life. And that's how Kobe was using it, especially when he goes to this American high school. And then I want to share with you this next part, because the book told us, and this was the perspective of a coach called Tex Winter, a veteran coach who would mentor Bryant at the LA Lakers. It said Winter was already quite taken with his new young charge, who studied the game so hard and practiced relentlessly, putting to use his fabulous talents to a degree that exceeded even that of the great Jordan, it said. So we're back to that work ethic. Nobody worked harder than Kobe. Relentless is what we're talking about. So now, I feel like this episode's gone quick. We're coming to the final four. And these are some of the elements in my eyes that gave Kobe the opportunity to be so dominant. I love these four elements. So the next one, number 13, is a sponge-like mentality. And we're going to go back to Kobe's high school coach, who told us this. Kobe had a sponge-like mentality to be the best. He could always absorb information. And I always thought that as a coach, his brain was like a sponge. And obviously, if you've coached, you can't say that about all of your players. You tell Kobe something once, this is key. You tell Kobe something once, and you don't have to say it again. Now, the thing that this made me think about, couple of concepts. First off, it was a bit like Kobe had the answers to the quiz. And how I think he got these answers, and this touches upon what I told you earlier, studying the game like Kobe did, his knowledge, his intellect on the game was so much more advanced than the players around him. And so that is why he gave himself this opportunity to be a sponge. The more you know, the more you can take in. And so it is this great kind of cycle on knowledge. I just love that aspect, actually. It's why when I go through these notes, of course I couldn't do the episode without my notes, but at the same time, sometimes I feel like I don't need to look at my notes. I just see one word and that sparks exactly, what I wanted to share with you. And so it's, in some ways it's the same thing. And so it brings us on to this story about Kobe's high school coach. This was one of the most amazing stories in the entire book, because I just think this is so rare what we're going to learn here. And so it talks about how Kobe's high school coach was hiring other coaches based off their playing ability, which is just ridiculous. And so this paragraph, when I started to figure out, this is his coach talking, when I started to figure out how good this character named Kobe Bryant was, I hired people on my coaching staff based on playing ability. My sole intention, I've got to find people that can guard this kid, that can compete with this kid, that can challenge this kid. Have you ever heard anything more ridiculous? That can challenge this kid. And so it said he picked up former collegiate player, an athletic guard named Jimmy Kaiserman. Then he talked his own brother Drew, who had size and strength, into leaving the corporate world to work as a coach. The inside joke of the Lower Merion program became, holy shit, I'm going to jump on a plane and come guard this 14-year-old. This isn't going to be a problem. The punchline, of course, was that they would all be beaten by this ferocious freshman. Oh my God. Have you ever heard anything like that? It makes these episodes a joy when I've got bits like this to share with you. It's stories like this that as I said, it made me want to start the episode because I just feel like this gives us an indication of just how great Kobe Bryant was and why following his blueprint can make a big difference to our own lives. So now we come to element 14, and this was just simply Kobe's love for learning. I feel like we've been talking about this, but this was so vital in the way that Kobe would develop these skills and ultimately, do everything he could to reach his full potential. And it was just clear to see that when it came to knowledge, he had this insatiable attitude. And so this kind of summarizes it in one paragraph. Let me go to this. It said, even though Bryant's focus on his schoolwork didn't match the mental effort he gave to basketball, Mastrano, one of his teachers, still sensed his hunger for gaining all sorts of knowledge. He sees learning as empowering. He listens very intently, she said in 2014. Could you imagine what the world would be like if everybody lived this way, she said. Two things that stood out to me there. This hunger for learning, and to be a great learner, you really have to become a great listener. And I don't think most people would think of Kobe Bryant as a great listener, but I think that's an underrated skill. When I think about some of the best people I know, in fact, I've got one person in mind right now. They are an astonishing listener. When they were teaching me a particular subject, I remember how patient they were with me, how they would just listen, let me sort of try to unfold ideas and concepts, and they would just give me the space to let me do this. Instead of having to interrupt and sort of show me their intelligence, they were able to sit back and sort of give me the floor. And I've never forgot that, actually. And so now I really work on my own listening skills. If I'm with someone, I love it when we've talked for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and I feel like they've had 70% or more of the floor. Again, I just think it's an underrated skill. And, one of the other things that I would say about Kobe and being a lifetime learner, he read a lot of books. He read biographies. He would also phone up when he got a little bit more notoriety. He would phone up people like Steve Jobs or Oprah Winfrey, and he'd say, because they knew who it was, he'd say, oh, it's Kobe Bryant. So they'd take the call and he'd ask them, what books have you been reading and what have you been learning? And so he was really sort of preparing himself for life after basketball. But one of his great attributes was this quest for learning, but the ability to ask questions. And so Kobe said, and this is, almost every stage of his life, but especially when he got to the NBA, I asked a ton of questions. I was curious. I wanted to improve, learn, and fill my head with the history of the game. No matter who I was with, a coach, Hall of Famer, teammate, and no matter the situation, game, practice, vacation, I would fire away question after question, he said, just so hungry to learn. I mean, I just think this is a blueprint for learning. Become a great listener and then study like your life depends on it, because after all, I feel like it does. And I will say this as well. There was a quote here that he said, by studying the tiniest details, asking questions that others wouldn't, and seeking knowledge at every turn, he compounded his growth and prepared himself for any challenge. I mean, actually, I thought that was his quote. That was just something that I wrote down. But it's studying the tiniest details. And so, okay, that brings us to our final two elements, number 15 and number 16 for this episode. And then we'll talk about the final 9 in part 2. So number 15 on our list is focus. Focus. Kobe was one of the most focused people I've ever read or studied. And what I love about what I'm going to share with you now, it's so easy to just think that these champions have a hockey stick route to the top. They don't face adversity. They just always win. But this paragraph tells a true story. And so it said this: Although Downer was a young coach at the time, he would go on to become the dean of Pennsylvania high school basketball. So this was Kobe's high school coach. Go on to become the dean of Pennsylvania high school basketball with 3 state championship teams on his resume. The experience of coaching Kobe Bryant was formative, he said. You know, when you put the whole puzzle together now and you look at his age and the journey he made, just his singularity, the focus was just incredible. I don't know if crazy is the right word, there's that crazy again, but he was certainly unique. And then it said this, the losses of the first season certainly made life difficult for both the young coach and the star freshman, but rather than drive them apart, it served as a bonding element, Downer said. We didn't like to lose, but we were not very good. That means in the first year, but we were not very good. After every loss, we just couldn't wait to get back in the gym the next day to get back to work. And then Kobe said, my first year was very difficult. I think we were 4-20. It was a very hard year, but I gained some experience. And so I just love the fact that Kobe was like this. Get back in the gym. I mean, that says it all. And then this final part of our episode, this is when things really started to kind of get on a fast track for Kobe, how he would turn any of the disappointments. He'd now sort of acclimatized himself with going to an American high school. And this final section is all about sort of Kobe through his teenage years. And so I want to take us into these amazing basketball camps. The biography talks a lot about this. And so they were run predominantly by Nike and Adidas. And these were just such a pivotal part of the basketball landscape because these companies were trying to identify the young talent. They were looking for the next great prospect. And so, I mean, the thing is, if you can go to one of these camps and get noticed, you might just get a multi-million-dollar endorsement deal. So one of the scouts that it talks about a lot in the book, I really went on to like this guy a lot. Sonny Vaccaro was his name. His official title was marketing executive, but basically he was a full-time talent hustler, and I just loved this guy. He was so instrumental in shaping modern basketball. He was the guy actually who helped to get Michael Jordan. He was the guy that found Jordan and helped to get him this big endorsement deal at Nike. And so if you haven't seen it, they actually made a movie about Sonny Vaccaro in 2023 starring Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's a bit cheesy, but it's pretty good. And so it's the story of Vaccaro and how Jordan came to Nike. But what we're going to talk about from the biography is now a few years went by and Vaccaro actually left Nike and went to work for Adidas. So now he's looking for the next Jordan. And so there's a couple of paragraphs that set up this particular final part of our episode. And so let me share this with you. This is exciting in my book. The day before the camp opened in July of 94, Vaccaro looked up to find Joe Bryant standing before him in need of a favor. Vaccaro hadn't seen Jelly Bean since he was the MVP of his high school all-star tournament in 1972. Think about that. Kobe's father was the MVP in 1972, at least not in person. Joe quickly explained that he had a son who had just finished an excellent high school sophomore season, but that no one would let him in to one of the elite camps. And Kobe said, when I was in high school, nobody would take a chance on me coming to one of their camps, to come to an all-American camp, he said. Now, one of the reasons behind this, why Kobe wasn't invited, is because back then they would go to the tougher side of town. That's where they found success normally in spotting the young talent. And that tells us something about being hungry. When you've almost got no other options, no plan B, you just play really hungry. The interesting thing about Kobe, although Kobe came from what they called the softer side of town, he still had this astonishing hunger. And so let's continue because this next part's awesome. So it said, he granted Kobe access to the camp because he knew his father. And so this is what he told us. He watched Bryant the first day, saw that he was very good and followed his progress that week. He saw that he was a good-looking kid and found out that he'd been raised in Italy and spoke multiple languages. But the real impression came once the camp was over, when Kobe walked up to Vaccaro, thanked him and gave him a hug. It was a very Italian thing in some ways for Vaccaro, who was also known for giving players a kiss on both cheeks. And then Kobe said this. "I wasn't the best player at your camp this week," Bryant told Vaccaro, "but next year I will be." Let that settle for a second. I mean, that is superstar behavior. So continuing, Vaccaro recalled the moment, giving him chills. In an instant, he sensed the game's next great player had just made himself known. God, I'm getting chills. Bryant's gesture represented the blend of machismo and charm that only the great ones seemed to have. Combining this with all the other things Vaccaro had learnt about the 15-year-old, he suspected that Bryant was in possession of the it factor needed to sell shoes. He wasn't entirely sure, but he had a strong hunch, basically, that this kid could be the next Jordan. And that brings us to our final element of this episode, element number 16, and this was a sense of urgency. Now, what I'll tell you, this goes back to the best people I've been around, and I've had a lucky life. I have moved in some circles, and when I think about some of the most successful people, the way they use time, they value it very much, and so they're determined to get the most out of every minute, every hour, every day, every year. They respect time in a way that unsuccessful people they don't seem to grasp the fact that we're limited in our time. And so that was Kobe Bryant, and also the way he played the game. It had that same sense of urgency where he wanted to prove himself and he didn't want to wait. And so, Donnie Carr, who we mentioned earlier, he gave us a couple of very interesting insights around Kobe at this point in time. And so first off, he said, Kobe, going into that summer of 11th grade, everything came together for him. That's when he started to do some really special things on the basketball court. He had that mentality, the will. He was the most determined person I'd ever seen. I'm pausing a second on that because I want to tell you something very important. So many of these other 15 elements that we've talked about, the self-belief, the obsession, being relentless, work ethic, when you put these together, this is why you can have this level of belief, the mentality, the will to be the most determined. You can't just do it without doing the work. You have to do the work. It doesn't come for free. And what I also love is this little bit that I'm going to share with you from Kobe's coach, the way they were also preparing his mentality to go out there and be the MVP. And so his coach told him this from day one. As a freshman, you're amongst a pool of 100. However, you know that 50 of those won't work hard, or 50 of those won't be coachable, or they'll discover drugs or discover girls. And so the pool of potential great players will halve itself every year. This is brilliant for your mentality. 100 becomes 50, 50 becomes 25, 25 becomes 10, and 10 becomes 5. And what was amazing about Kobe to me, he had this maniacal work ethic where he wouldn't allow distractions to get in the way of his goals and his dreams and, what he wanted to accomplish. And so Downer, the coach, said from that junior to senior year, he kind of made the jump from like 20 to 5. And he said he used to get furious at me when I needled him and told him that somebody was better than him. And so I just love that he was being pushed in the right way from his coach. Believe me, if you're not being pushed in the right way as well, if you don't have the right people around you, you will not achieve your potential. Coaches, in my opinion, are massively important in the story of these champions. And so I want to go back and just talk about the golfer Brooks Koepka, because 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was the US Open at Bethpage Black. I didn't write it down, but I think it was. Anyway, Brooks is at the press conference, and he's a bit of a major specialist. And so the press are asking him, why is he so good when he gets to a major? And he basically said this: there's 156 guys in the field, so you can figure at least 80 of them I'm just going to beat. Then, out of the players remaining, half of them won't play well. So now you're down to about 35. Of those 35, the pressure is going to get to some of them. And so that only leaves a few more. And all you've got to do is beat those guys. I mean, how simple does it sound to win a major championship? But I'm going to say right now, I bet you out of those 156 players, maybe there's 2, 3 that are thinking like this, when in fact, there should be 25 guys thinking like this. And so, in my experience, people take themselves out of the game before it even starts, especially in the biggest tournaments, in the biggest moments. And so I want to go back to this kid, Donny Carr, that I've mentioned. And so now he's talking about 15 or 16-year-old version of Kobe. He said, remember the tougher side of town where they find the talent? Listen to this line. You might as well say he was homeless, because that's how hungry he played, how much heart and determination he had. He was always trying to get better, to the point where he cut off everything and everyone. He had a vision, a goal in mind, and that was it. Nothing was going to stand in his way. Now, to be honest with you, I love a particular part there. He cut off everything and everyone. Get rid of everyone in your life that doesn't help you and support you on those goals that you're chasing down. And I don't mean you get rid of them maybe completely, but you limit your time with them, because, as I've said, people don't want you to succeed. And so I love the fact that the Kobe Bryant blueprint here is that he cut people out. And so then it went on to tell us, and we haven't got long left in this episode, this is where it kind of comes to a crescendo. So it went on to say, he played like each game was his last. Each workout was his last. He out-willed people, man. His will was just unmatched, it said. And then it said, Bryant led a team from Delaware Valley to a surprise championship, averaging 38 points a game, earning another MVP award. And then this line, his confidence was growing yet again, which barely seemed possible. The kid who had come up in Italy, watching his father and riding the bus with the pros, who was close enough to the pro game to mop the sweat off the floor, great line, to mop the sweat off the floor, was now nearing his own big moment. And this story really demonstrates this big moment. So Kobe and this guy, Donny Carr, are invited to that basketball camp where Kobe had said that he was going to come back and be the best to Sonny Vaccaro. So the players checked into their rooms and they're walking to their dormitories. And so Kobe turns to Donny Carr and he says, you and I have known each other for years. So don't take this personally, man, but don't come to my room. I'm not coming to yours. I'm not even going outside of my room. And then he says this line, it's amazing. I'm leaving this camp as the number 1 player in the country. And from there, Kobe takes over. Now, over the next 15 pages or so, 15, 20 pages of the book, it really goes into detail about this whole moment of how Kobe's at this camp and a couple of other camps. But I'm just going to share with you a few of my favorite paragraphs. And so it said, his performance at the 1995 Adidas camp didn't disappoint. Bryant was named MVP. In the wake of the Adidas camp, Sonny Vaccaro was completely convinced that Bryant was the player that he needed to sign to Adidas to be the next Jordan. And then this line's sensational. It told us, I am the best, Bryant had boasted to Vaccaro after he was named MVP of the camp. And I'm going to be the best pro too, he told him. That comment had finally cemented the notion in the shoe guru's mind. Bryant would actually do it, Vaccaro thought. He would actually turn pro. That means straight out of high school, actually turn pro. What Bryant said gave him reason to step up his efforts at signing him, Vaccaro recalled. I had to have something that gave me the encouragement, plus the it factor. It just glared at me every time I looked at Bryant. Everything followed this child. He lived under this halo. It was unbelievable, Vaccaro would say. Man, if you haven't read this biography, man, I do hope this encourages you to go read it for yourself. I think you'll love it. And so, of course, not only was Kobe the best player, but that deal would come about from Adidas. And Kobe would go on to sign the biggest deal in history for a teenager. He would ink a deal with Adidas that was reported to be $48 million over a 6-year deal. And Kobe would sign that at 17. Well, actually, he wouldn't sign it at 17 because he wasn't old enough. His parents had to sign that contract for him. I mean, that tells us everything. Now, a note that I wrote down here was one of my favorite quotes from Conor McGregor. McGregor said, and it reminded me of Kobe at these basketball camps, "We're not here to take part. We're here to take over." That's exactly the Kobe Bryant way. He didn't show up to participate. He showed up to dominate. And I've got to tell you, it was so fun. I mean, this is just part 1 of our Kobe Bryant study. Part 2 is coming. We are going to share the final 9 traits. I'm going to share some stories into how Kobe is chasing down NBA rings. We're going to learn about the aspects of his pro career that can really make a difference to our lives as well. And I've got a really phenomenal story. I wanted to share with you this big, quite long story in this episode, but I decided we've already been going for too long and I'll save it for part 2, so don't miss it. So for you and I, that is definitely a wrap on episode 1 of the Champions podcast. And so until the next episode, from me, Dave Marsh, cheerio.